Hi, it's Eva again. I wake up ambitious people like you and dare them to be great. Many of my clients, when coming to me for coaching, they realize something after they've been through the coaching trajectory. And typically they come to me because they feel frustrated or insecure, or because they know that even though they're achieving a lot, they can get much more out of themselves, but they don't yet know how. And now they know that the reasons why they're in my office, it's because it's linked to trauma. And trauma, it's very often a misunderstood word. And I can already hear a lot of you think, nah, I didn't face any trauma. I don't have it. Not for me. The past is in the past, not worth looking backwards to. Well, in this video, I'd like to challenge you on that. Because understanding trauma is actually crucial to really understanding yourself and to overcome the challenges that you're maybe facing today, or even go above and beyond what you're doing today. So if you think, nah, that's not really me, or if you think, I do know that I have some trauma, please tell me more. Well, in both cases, keep listening and let me know for the first group if you still don't think that you faced any type of trauma by the end of this video. All right? Good. So, as I already mentioned, when we hear the word trauma, we often think of these major events like an accident, abuse, big things that happen to us. But trauma is actually much broader than that. It's also the big things, but it's also any type of experience that really overwhelms your nervous system and leaves this lasting negative impact on your well-being. So it can be big, but it can also be really small. It can be small things that kept happening over and over again for a prolonged period of time, and that always put your nervous system into a kind of fight or flight mode. So it overstimulated your nervous system in a way that your nervous system doesn't know how to cope with it anymore, and now it's trauma stored in your body. Trauma really affects how you see yourself. It affects your relationships. It affects how you achieve your goals. It affects how you deal with setbacks. It affects so many things because it's still stored in there and it needs out. But if you don't let it out, it will just dominate how you behave, how you feel, how you think. So it's really important to understand which trauma aspects are still living inside of you in order to really move forward. And you need to think of it as this, as children, your brain is still developing. And up till the age of 7, actually, you cannot think rationally yet. So up until the age of 7, it's still a brain that functions like a sponge, and it really absorbs everything that's happening around you. And it makes these conclusions in this very illogical way. And so that means that even in loving families, things can happen that our young minds misinterpret and thus result in trauma, like the small trauma. So a very, very, very common example of this is people that grew up with loving parents that were super busy. You have experienced their love, but maybe you concluded that you had to be the best in order to get their attention, that you had to be pretty in order to get their attention, that you had to be the fixer in order to get their attention. And they can't really do anything about it. I mean, yes, they were super busy, but they didn't have that much of an impact on the conclusions that you created about yourself in order to be seen by them. And so if this is the case, that you had very hardworking parents that weren't around very often, but loving, it might be that today you're constantly wanting to be perfect, or you constantly want to achieve big results because you started to believe about yourself that this is necessary in order to be seen, not just by them, but by everyone around you. And that's an echo of an old, they call it an ego trauma. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he wrote a book about it. The Body Keeps the Score, a recommended read if you're interested in trauma and how it affects you. And so he says that this is really an echo of trauma that you will notice. So if you hear this, you know that trauma, it can really stem from various sources. It can be one single overwhelming event. That's typically when people know, okay, something is wrong, and if I didn't deal with that yet, probably it will impact a lot. But much more are there the people that have a series of smaller incidents that have accumulated over the years and that are not aware of the fact that it's impacting their everyday life. And it's these people, when they come to me for coaching for various reasons, but often to really get bigger and better and to live from a place where they feel like fulfilled, happy, that they can play again. Very often with them, it's about understanding, okay, what did I start believing about myself, where my past is maybe the root cause of. So these seemingly minor things like the dismissive comment of a parent or a childhood bully can really leave this lasting impact. Also, parents that talk negatively about each other to you, it all can leave a lasting impact. And Dr. Gabor Maté, who's also really an expert in the field of trauma, he says that trauma is not what happens to you, so it's not the event, it's not the external event, but it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you externally. So it's not the thing itself, although in these really major traumas like abuse, of course, that external thing has a major impact, but it's much more the interpretation of what happened to you, the interpretation of how lost you were or unsupported you were, that results in the trauma. And that's good news, because if it's the interpretation, if it's our interpretation of what happened to us rather than the thing itself, we can break free from it. If it would be the thing, the trauma, if it would be the car crash, if it would be the accident, we would be lost because we wouldn't be able to deal with it. But no, it's not that. It's our interpretation, and we can change that narrative. You own your narrative. Maybe don't know how yet. That's normal. But you own your narrative. So I have some examples, because examples is what most people makes them realize, okay, yeah, maybe it was me, and maybe I did have some, I do have some traumas. So I brought some examples from things that I often see in my office. So, for example, people that grew up with a parent struggling with depression. It can be outspoken depression, or it can be that you felt that there was depression. And that really has a lasting impact. Or maybe a parent that had really unpredictable mood. So they could all of a sudden start yelling at you or be very angry at you and made you very insecure, lasting impact. Perhaps maybe you grew up in a family that really carries an unspoken fear of something passed down from grandparents who lived maybe through war. Or what I also notice is that people that grew up in poverty and where money was this constant source of stress, lasting impact. And so it's very important to understand what the root causes of your self-sabotage. Because if you understand that, and if you understand your meaning to that, you can change it. So when dealing with trauma, you will develop different coping mechanisms. And there's two main types of coping mechanisms that I notice. And let me give you the example of two children here. So imagine that there's two children growing up in a similar challenging environment. Then these two children might react to it in a completely different way. And so one might become what I call the fighter. And the fighter kid will be really driven by this strong determination to be successful and to avoid in the future everything that they have lived in the past. So they really channel their pain, their discomfort, whatever they have missed, into an achievement, into constantly pushing themselves, and into proving their worth, into proving that things can be different for them. For example, in families where no one went to university, typically then there's this one person that says, I'm going to do it differently. And that goes and studies and does it all on their own, but then also goes through life from that belief. I need to do it all on my own. So they don't accept help, and they perceive accepting help or asking for help also as a weakness. And they don't understand why someone should need it help, because they didn't have it. So that's also an example. But so the fighter kid will probably have these incredible accomplishments because they are so driven to avoid what they've experienced in their past. They're often the high achievers that come to my office. They're the high achievers that for other people really seem to effortlessly climb the ladder of success. They're the entrepreneurs who launch multiple businesses. They are the executives who work tremendously to reach the top. Athletes that can really push their bodies because they have this really strong sense of anger and drive to avoid whatever happened in the past. But at a certain point, that drive, that anger, the thing that they want to avoid, it starts to feel annoying. It starts to feel as a burden. And they get to a point where, yes, they're afraid of losing control. Yes, they are afraid to fail, to not be good enough, to be exposed, to be bullied again, to grow up in poverty. So they all fear that. But at the same time, at a certain moment in time, typically it's around mid-30s, 40s, that they realize like, oh, but I'm depleted, I'm exhausted. Is this really it? Is this really it? I mean, I have all of what I've achieved, but I feel exhausted, I feel depleted. What do I do? And that's normal to feel it, because the achievements up till then, they were achieved by a need to compensate for something that they didn't, that they lacked. So they're trying to fill a void with their high performance. They're trying to prove themselves with their high performance, but always fighting to prove yourself, it leaves you empty. It doesn't give you fulfillment. And so these early experiences of criticism and neglect, they create certain beliefs that fighters internalize and say, this time it will be different. And so the challenge for a fighter, and if you recognize yourself in a fighter, is to first of all see the pattern and find a way to understand, okay, but how, like what's really important to me? Who am I? What do I want? And it's often very confronting questions because it's questions you probably never ask yourself. It's typically when I tell these people, you are not defined by what you do. You are more than just a fixer. You are more than just an entrepreneur. You are more than the responsible one that takes care of everyone. In the beginning, they always feel a bit, they don't understand what I'm saying, because they're like, huh? If I'm not all of that, what's left? Then who am I? And that's a tricky question, because up until then, they define themselves by their external achievements. And so if this is not who I am, who am I? And when these people then deal with their trauma and can start being more and more who they are and feel what that is, because you actually feel it in your body when you are and you are not. You can already feel it in your body, even though you're not necessarily aware of it. But when they deal with that trauma, they can leave the past in the past and they can continue from the present moment onwards. And that's the moment where these fighters can really tap into their inner greatness. And then they can still achieve incredible things, but not from a place of fear or lack, but from a phase of, or from a place of genuine passion, purpose, fulfillment, drive. And that's where you want to be. Because if you are an entrepreneur from that spot, if you are an executive from that spot, if you live life from your inner greatness, it feels effortless. Of course, you will still have some setbacks here and there, but it won't feel like this big dread or, this one more thing, I can't handle it anymore. No, it will just be, okay, fine. Life's a fun adventure and this is another hurdle on the way. How do I deal with it? Life is a game. I remember working with a client, let's call her Sarah. And Sarah, she was a really successful entrepreneur, very ambitious. And everyone was always very amazed by what she all achieved. I mean, she had always 3 different businesses running at the same time. She always had to choose, prioritize, okay, what do I focus on? Because it's all, she has so much value everywhere. Like whatever she touches, it turns into gold. But on the inside, she struggled with a lot of self-doubt. And as we explored her past and we explored, okay, but how does this self-doubt feel? Where does it come from? We uncovered that in her childhood, she was at a certain moment in time in class publicly ridiculized because she made a mistake. And for her, she still could feel the shame of being ridiculized, having the other kids laugh because of her mistake. And it looks like a very small event, but it really left a deep scar. And the impact, so a lot of people, when they realize what it's about, their first reaction is, okay, but it wasn't that bad, or it was only one mistake. Like they start to rationalize it and they start to think, okay, from today as a grown-up, it's not that bad. But that's a big thinking mistake, because trauma installs itself in your body at the moment that it was created. So don't think from a grown-up perspective it wasn't that bad. No, go and try to empathize with that kid. What was it like for that kid to experience that? For a kid that was so important for that kid to belong. I mean, if an entire class is laughing at you, it's scary as hell, because you're still a kid. You don't know how to rationalize it. You don't know what the future holds. Like, your life is this class, your classmates. You want to belong. And this seemingly small event really shaped her beliefs about her own abilities. She really wasn't able, she wouldn't allow herself to make any mistake, because she believed, if I make a mistake, people will laugh at me and I will not belong. And as we were able to handle that situation and just leave it in the past where it belongs, now she's freed of that belief. And that's what I want for you too. So how do you know that trauma is still present in your life? Well, it can manifest in different ways. So it can manifest bodily, so bodily sensations. So notice when you go through your day, or when you bump into a certain situation that catches you off guard or gives you a lot of stress or frustration, start noticing where you feel it in your body. Is it like, do you have a tight chest? Is it maybe a knot in your stomach? Is it maybe this pulsating feeling near your diaphragm? Is it your head that's painful? Maybe there's this pressure around your ears. Maybe your shoulders start to tense. Like, for everyone it's different, but notice what your body is trying to tell you and where you feel it in your body at the moment where you experience something that stirs something up in you. So that's one way that it manifests itself. Next to it, you can look into your thinking patterns. So when does your thinking start to become thinking in a loop, the same sentences over and over again? Maybe you will start overthinking, overanalyzing. Maybe you will start to talk to yourself in a very harsh way. So what's happening in your head? Because that also can I can show you that you're stepping into a trauma response. What are your emotions like? Is your self-esteem maybe all of a sudden low? Maybe all of a sudden you don't really know how to listen to other people. A lot of people enter my office and they ask me, please tell me, how do I get more interested in other people? Like, seriously, I don't care about what other people are saying. How do I do it? Because I have a family, I have kids, I want them to feel heard. But seriously, I don't know how. Maybe trauma manifests itself in you noticing that you don't trust anyone or feeling that you're never good enough. So it can really manifest in a lot of different ways. So start to pay attention to it. Or do you procrastinate? Do you do people pleasing? Do you constantly need to control everything? Trauma can really keep you playing small, even when you have the potential to do great things. And you often will see, how am I able to do great things on this and this and this? But when it comes to creating this stupid presentation, all of a sudden there's this self-doubt or the procrastination. Well, it's weird, it's illogical, probably trauma. It's important to recognize your triggers. And people who trigger a strong emotional reaction in you often also represent unresolved trauma. Do you have a person in mind that whenever you see them, whenever they open their mouth, whenever they say anything, instant frustration or instant rage or maybe instant insecurity? It's not about them. It's about who they are subconsciously representing to you. They might embody characteristics or behaviors that remind you of things in the past that hurt you or that really activated your defense mechanisms. So I'm curious. Make a list. All the people that trigger you in a certain way, and start to see, are there any patterns between these people? Is there something I could link to and maybe find a meaning to what triggers me? A client of mine, Max, he was an executive, and he is an executive, and what he struggles with are control issues. And whenever there is someone that comes across a bit more chaotic, he tenses up completely. So people that are not fully on top of their game, wow, he starts to be passive-aggressive towards them. He starts to micromanage them. He starts to have this specific pain in his neck when he's in a room with them. And so they're really impacting him a lot. And again, when digging deeper, okay, but what is this? What is it with chaotic people that triggers you so much? Because it's not about them, it's about you. It's not about you, but it's about your interpretation of them. And Max, when growing up, he grew up in his entrepreneurial family. And at a certain period in time, the family business was in problems. It was actually crumbling. And it was crumbling due to a lack of clear oversight of the person being in charge of the finances, and because of that chaoticness. And even though now the family business is up and thriving again, subconsciously for him, because he felt the fear of his parents back in the days, he concluded, this will never happen to me. I will always have clear oversight and control of every single little detail to avoid my business to ever crumble the way that it did back in the days. And so these chaotic people, they trigger his trauma response. And so the moment we were able to, again, leave that trauma response in the past, he could just see the chaotic people for who they are. And yes, he could still reprimand them and he could still be on top of their work, but it was less intense for him, and it was less like this trigger of rage and frustration whenever he saw them. So he was much more able to just be in the present moment and work from the present moment rather than being hyped up by something that happened in the past. And so that's interesting for you to be curious about. So I already gave you a couple of things you can do, but here's 4 aspects that you can take into account or that you can take with you in the coming days to explore your relationship with potential traumas, big and small, from the past. So the first thing you need to do is acknowledge and accept the fact that there will be trauma. It's normal. Trauma is not a sign of weakness. It's just a natural response to overwhelming experiences in the past or in the present. And it's held in the body. So it's your body keeps the score, your body knows, and it's in your body that you will notice it. And that's step number 2. So next to acknowledging and just accepting that it's there, you can go and recognize the signs. So pay attention to bodily sensations, recurring patterns in your life. So if it can go from you're always put in the same, like you always get the same type of manager, or you always bump into the same type of problem, and at a certain point it becomes just ridiculous. You never find a parking spot. Just go and observe what are the things that you tell yourself like, always the same. It's always with me that they cross my boundaries. It's always with me that all of a sudden there's this situation popping up. So really go and check out the patterns. Go and explore who triggers you and what it is then maybe that triggers you, and go and explore the bodily sensations. Thirdly, next to accepting that it's there and recognizing the signs, and this is a very important one, don't minimize your experiences. People often say, it wasn't that bad, or I don't have the right to complain because other people have it so much worse. Well, that's not acknowledging it. And trauma is not a competition. I mean, any experience that leaves a lasting negative impact can be considered traumatic. And it has less to do with the content than with your interpretation of the event. That's what we discussed before, like Gabor Maté says it. So it's not because you're not physically scarred of something that the event didn't impact you. And Edith Eva Eger, she wrote a very powerful book, The Choice, and she talks about it in her book, about a woman that came to her therapy session, and the woman was really distressed about a scratch on her new car. And so Eger, she lived through the horrors of Auschwitz. So initially, she's also a psychiatrist, by the way. So initially she struggled to empathize with this woman because she said, it's so trivial. I mean, a scratch on your car. But after doing introspection, she realized that minimizing the woman's pain wouldn't help. And so instead of minimizing it, she guided the woman to really explore, what is this really about? It's not about the scratch in the car. It's about something else. And when digging, she found out that this scar really represented the newfound freedom that this woman experienced and her independence after going through a difficult divorce. And so the scratch wasn't about the scratch. The scratch was symbolizing this threat to her independence and her sense of self-worth. And that's always interesting. So don't just wipe away the thing because the content doesn't seem severe enough. Really go and understand what's the deeper meaning of this. What's the deeper meaning of this? Simon Sinek's 5 Times Whys can help you that. Like, why is it upsetting you that there's a scratch in your car? Okay, and why, and why, and why? Until you come to the root of the problem. So trauma is not a competition. It's not about comparing your pain to others. Any experience that overwhelmed your coping mechanism today, but also as a kid, being a kid with a kid's brain, can be considered traumatic. So take that into account. And then finally, seek support, get help. Let people help you in exploring what the big or the small traumas are in your life that are still affecting you. If you suspect that you're struggling with the effects of trauma after listening to this video, reach out to a therapist or to a coach, because it's about your interpretation of what happened to you so you can heal that. So remember that you are not defined by your past experiences. I mean, you gained strength from your past experiences and resilience to overcome them. They're over now. So it's really about now also leaving it in the past where it belonged rather than dragging it with you in your backpack. So if this resonated with you, this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, because together we can create a world where people wake up and dare to be great. See you in the next video.